Hi everyone, welcome to the Beachman 64 Owner's Manual. Today we're going to be going through your entire bike, front to back, talking about all the different features and parts of this bike that are going to be most important to your ownership experience. Now we're going to start at the front and move toward the back. We're going to talk a bit about the keys, the battery system, all the functions of your heads-up display, general care for the bike, and then we're going to do another video that'll come out around the same time about how to ride and the finer points of long-term ownership. For those who have their bike shipped to them in our packaging system, your keys are going to be attached by a zip tie here on the rear grab bar. First thing we're going to want to do after the bike is unpackaged, go ahead and cut this off. Let's start at the front. Over here we have your tires. Now, on an electric bike, the maintenance is very minimal. We don't have to deal with clutch systems, oil, gas leaks, anything like that. But the most important piece of maintenance you can do on a 64 is pumping your tires. It's the most common thing that goes wrong is people allow the air pressure to drop, and when you take it out for a ride the next time, you're going to have those tires pop. Beachman tires are tube tires. They're 18 inches by 3.5 wide. They have an internal tube you're going to need to replace when a pop happens. And of course, you can go to any Beachman certified service center to do that, or if you're in the Toronto area, come to the headquarters and we'll do it right here on the stand. The front brake system is hydraulic, same with the back. It's very overbuilt. It's designed for a 600-pound bike, which means that changing out your pads and rotors is going to be a pretty rare thing because the wear on them is a lot less than what they're built for. Moving backwards, we've got your front fender, your headlight, your heads-up display, and control system. The hand controls in your Beachman are comprised of two sections. There are the handlebar controls, and then there's the throttle and brakes for drive. Let's start with the controls. Most important button on your bike is the kill switch. Now the kill switch is activated when you're on that red X. When we turn the bike on, you're going to see that the kill switch is engaged because the turning throttle icon there is active. When you disengage the kill switch, that icon goes away and the green ready light lights up, indicating that your bike is ready to ride. Now, we want to make sure that this is engaged whenever you're not riding. So when you come to a stop, you're going to make sure you hit that X before you dismount your bike. It's extremely important to remember this, as this is the most common reason that people have crashes on their bike, is not actually riding it, but when they're dismounted, their kill switch is disengaged, and they accidentally tweak the throttle, causing the bike to shoot away. With this off, we can talk about the rest of the controls. Now, the only other safety function here is your horn. There's one on each side, ensuring that you always have it just within hand's reach. And it's very loud to account for the fact that the bike itself is silent. Final controls are going to be your lighting ones. On the right-hand side, we've got the lighting power switch, which toggles between full on, daytime running mode, and off. When your bike light is on, you can activate the high beams on your left-hand side here. High beam on, high beam off. Lastly, you got your turn signals here, left and right. Now, unlike a car, the turn signals are not going to deactivate themselves, which means when you're done turning, it's your responsibility to move it back to the center position. If you forget this, which does happen from time to time, there will be a lot of very confused cars behind you waiting for you to turn left or right. So make a habit, every once in a while, feeling around and making sure that it's in that center position when you're riding. Lastly, we've got your throttle and brakes. Now, what's most important to know about your throttle and brakes is that they're both highly sensitive. The brakes are a little over-engineered for the size of the bike, as I mentioned before, which means that slamming them hard is going to have a pretty significant result. The thing to remember then is to be gentle on the brakes and to use them equally. Likewise with the throttle, there's a lot of torque on a Beachman, so you're going to want to be gentle on and gentle off. Trying to avoid riding it like this, snapping on and off a lot. Instead, be smooth, and the bike will reward you with a smooth experience. The brand new Beachman HUD has all the information you need to know for a great ride. The most important part is battery gauge. Now, it has two functions. You can see the visual battery gauge, which presents a general indication of being full or empty, as well as the voltage. This bike's at 73 volts, which is about halfway. The maximum voltage is going to be around 84. As some bikes are 83, some bikes are 85, but generally 84 is going to be that full power. and 64 is empty, which is pretty easy to remember. So once you get below 70, that's when you should start thinking about, turning around and heading home. You're going to be just below half power. The heads-up display has all sorts of different lights and indicators. For instance, when your kill switch is engaged, you're going to see this throttle turning signal turn on and that green ready light turning off. As well, when you use your signals, you'll be able to see that the signal indicators are left and right. There is also an indicator for when the lights are engaged in the high beam setting. Your speedometer is located on the right, and the standard bike is in kilometers per hour. However, we will also be releasing mile per hour for our American customers. As you can see, the bike spools up. On the bottom, you have your RPM gauge, and on the right, you have your speed. When you first turn your bike on, you're going to see all sorts of symbols, and then you'll see your lifetime odometer. This is a brand new bike with 1 kilometer. And then, after a few seconds, it changes to your trip odometer. This is now going to show you how far you've ridden until you turn your bike back off and on again when it'll reset. An important thing about your key is that when you turn it to the left after having your bike on, by pushing down and then going left, this will engage the turn lock. Now, you need your bike to be turned to the left. It's going to lock it in place. Then, when you're done, bring it back to the right for the neutral, and then even further right to turn it back on and off. And that is everything on your HUD. When your bike is on, your daytime brake running light is going to be active. And when the brakes are applied, it's going to increase in brightness. Likewise, when your signals are activated, you'll see that the rear and front signals are quite adequate, very bright, super safe. Let's talk about your keys. The Beachman keys come with 2 full sets. Now, the first thing you're going to want to do when you get your keys is split them up into 2 distinct sets of keys. You're going to want a primary one that you ride with every day. Keep that Beachman keychain for it. And then split off a backup set that you're going to put in a safe and secure and, most importantly, easy to remember location in your house. There's nothing worse than forgetting where your backup is. Now, we'll run through the sections of the key fob. Pretty simple. You've got 3 buttons here: an unlock, a lock, and a remote start button. So the lock is pretty self-explanatory. You're going to press that. Your bike is armed. It's a touch-sensitive alarm, so if someone starts moving your bike around, pretty quickly, it's going to go off. Disarming it, you're just going to do 1 click. 2 beeps means it's disarmed, it's ready to ride. When your bike is armed, it's not going to be able to be ridden, and if someone pushes it in a certain direction, it's actually going to start fighting against them, using the motor to kind of confuse their movements. It's a nice little function. The last button here is the remote start. So the remote start, you're going to double tap it. It's going to turn your bike on. Now, I don't generally recommend using this because it just increases the odds you're going to leave your bike keys in your pocket and maybe end up losing them. So it's best to just always use the physical key. But what this is great for in a pinch is when you're getting your friends to have a test ride on your bike, check it out, you can use the remote start to ensure that, if they have a tumble or something like that, you can very easily turn the bike back off by pressing that unlock button once. It's going to shut off, and that means that, if there's a reason that you need that power to be cut off, it's not an issue. Finally, let's talk about the keys. So you've got a main key and a small one for your box. So the main key is the one that goes into your ignition. It's going to be going to the right-hand side to turn your bike on, or the left-hand side after being pushed in and turned left in order to activate your turn lock on the bike. There's also the smaller key here. This guy's for your battery box. Pretty self-explanatory. You're going to insert it down there, open up the box. That's all your keys. Cool. So coming down here, when you open up your battery box, what you're going to see are 3 things. You've got your breaker switch up here, you've got your battery itself, and you've got your Anderson connector that hooks it up to the bike. Now, before you touch stuff in your battery box, it's important to remember that your breaker needs to be in the off position when your hands are going in here. Now, that was already the case with this bike. Forward is on, backwards is off. Easy to tell when it snaps back. It's also going to be written on your breaker. When you have your breaker off, it's safe to go in and touch your bike. You can undo the straps, pull out your Anderson connector, disconnect it, and now your battery is free to remove with the handles. You want to plug it back in. pop it back in there. Might be a little awkward getting it in at that angle, but eventually it'll become muscle memory. The next thing, of course, is going to be to strap it back up. Plug your Anderson connector back in. Tuck it up in here. Safe to turn on your breaker. Your bike is now going to be active. It's important to make sure that your battery box is firmly locked every time you close it. The last thing you want is this thing coming tumbling out when you're riding. The rear wheel of your Beachman contains your motor. It's located here in the hub. The only thing to know about it is you want to take care of it. Make sure to adhere to the 300-pound weight limit on the Beachman. Try not to ride it up, incredibly steep hills, especially with a passenger, as that can result in a failure and overheating. Now, we've put programming into our controller to occasionally shut off in advance of an overheating incident. So if your bike's under a lot of stress, you may experience a temporary loss of power. If that's the case, especially if you were just riding up a steep hill or putting your bike through some intense off-road, just wait a bit. Let it cool off. You might touch your motor and feel that it's quite hot to the touch, which be careful, by the way, you could get burned. Give yourself some time, let the controller do its thing, and when the bike has cooled off enough, it should run just fine. If there is a true critical failure of your motor, you're backed by Beachman. We'll get you riding as soon as we can. Some of the most common maintenance questions we get are about little squeaks and noises that come out of the bike. And when you're working with a traditional motorcycle frame, there's obviously a little bit of noise expected because it's usually covered up by the motor. But with a silent bike, we have a much higher standard of quality. So the two most common sounds that you might have coming out of your bike are going to be a squeak coming out of your brake pads and rotors, as well as one coming out of your swing arm. I'm going to go through both of those. So first of all, let's talk about the swing arm. Sometimes when you're riding your bike, you might experience a squeak that happens when you go over bumps specifically. It'll be kind of a high pitch, like, and that's going to happen right here. It takes place in the axle bolt that connects your swing arm to your frame. Now that's the case when the bolt is a little bit tight. The way it's designed, this bolt is self-tightening. It's to ensure that it doesn't loosen over time with use. So occasionally what you might have to do is just go in with an adjustable wrench or a socket if you have it, and loosen this about 1/8 of a turn, maybe 1/4, and it should immediately solve it. If it's really bad, you are able to remove the bolt, grease it up with some classic bearing grease or bolt grease. But generally, we do that on assembly. So just a quick loosening should do the trick. The second most common noise that you can encounter with your Beachman 64 will be coming out of your brake pads. Now, this is very common on new brakes, on motorcycles or cars. Essentially what it is a tiny imperfection in that brake pad surface. Even 1 or 1/2 millimeter off, with the constant contact that happens with the rotor, it'll create that high-pitched sound. Now, what we recommend to fix that is called CRC D-Squeak. There's a few other brands that make it. This is the one we use at Beachman. But essentially, all you need to do is get your bike up on the midstand so that the wheel can spin freely. And then you're going to slowly rotate the wheel while applying the D-Squeak to the brake rotor itself, the metal part. Essentially what this is like a liquid version of sandpaper, an extremely fine metal granular liquid that's going to wear away at the surface in a very small level and just even out that brake pad so it fits perfectly on the rotor. It doesn't produce that sound anymore. What you're going to want to do after you apply it lightly to the entire brake rotor is get on your bike, ride around your neighborhood, and just kind of accelerate and then slowly pull on the brakes, and accelerate and slowly pull on the brakes. Do that for about 3 to 5 minutes. At that point, it should be fully ground down. And then throughout normal riding and brake use, it'll continue to have an effect, totally preventing that sound from coming back. The pedal system is very simple on a Beachman. It's a single gear. It's located down between your foot pegs and your passenger pegs. And believe it or not, they work. The chain on the bike is the most prone area to rust, as with any bicycle. So make sure to take good care of your bike chain and the axle between your pedals, because that will ensure that you can protect it from rust, which could damage the chain over time and also get on other parts of your bike. The rest of it should stand up pretty well to wear and tear outdoors, but it's always best to dry off your bike after a long ride in the rain, especially on key areas such as bolts, joining areas and welds where there might be an increased penetration of rust. There are two sets of foot pegs on your bike. They're the main pegs for the rider, which can fold up when you're bringing your bike through a tight alleyway, and the passenger pegs located on the rear. One important thing to note is that when building this bike, we only had so much space to work with. And so when the pedals are engaged while your passenger is riding, you might have a little bit of contact. So it's just important to note that when you're riding double, avoid walking your bike backwards when your passenger's feet are up, as with any bicycle, when a Beachman is going in reverse, the pedals move of their own accord. Just an important thing to know.
This is the best part.